The heir of the Jiang family has always been terrified of water. On the day he was discussing marriage with my older cousin, he accidentally fell into the water and was saved by me. With my reputation compromised, I somehow ended up becoming the heir's wife. My cousin resented me for stealing her love and married someone else out of spite. He also hated me, believing I used my favor to force his hand, and treated me terribly. During our most passionate moments in bed, he would bite my earlobe and ask,
"Marrying me in your sister's place, does it feel good?"
Caught in the middle, I suffered in silence, dying with a heavy heart. When I opened my eyes again, I was back by that very pond. He was struggling in the water, on the verge of sinking completely. I stood on the shore, my feet feeling as if they had taken root. But suddenly, a pair of hands from behind shoved me in with great force. The moment the river water rushed into my throat, I turned my head in panic. A figure dressed in grayish blue on the shore vanished behind the rockery. In an instant, a maid clapped her hands and cried out,
"Someone to help. The prince and the Wang family's second young lady have fallen into the water."
Those were the exact words. In my past life, it was those very words that trapped me in this absurd marriage. I must not let her shout them out. I scooped up a handful of silk and slammed it hard onto the face of the running maid. The muck blocked her eyes and mouth, and she shrieked, collapsing backward. Taking advantage of her panic as she scrambled to wipe her face, I turned around and pushed the unconscious Jiang Xu onto the shore. Taking a deep breath, I quietly submerged back into the bottom of the lake. A chaotic flurry of footsteps echoed above the lake. Today, the eldest princess returned to the capital in triumph. The midday banquet had not yet ended, and the female guests of the various families who were originally indoors all came running over upon hearing the commotion.
Quickly call a doctor.
Someone in the crowd was the first to shout.
Just now, the maid called out for the heir and the second Miss Wang. Why is only the heir here?
How did they both fall into the lake together? Could it be that they were meeting here in secret?
Ha ha ha.
What? Isn't the heir discussing marriage with the eldest Miss Wang? Could the second Miss Wang have jumped in to save him?
Regardless of whether she saved him or not, a man and a woman alone together, with wet clothes clinging to their skin. I'm afraid the young lady's reputation is.
These words, I heard them all in my past life. The only difference was, that time, I had actually jumped in myself solely to save a life. My drenched dress became a scandalous piece of gossip in their mouths. The man they were talking about was my husband in my past life, Jiang Xu, the heir of the Marquis of Yongchang. Everyone in the city knew him. He was exceptionally handsome, aloof, and upright. He was the dream husband of many noble young ladies. Yet, he treated everyone with polite indifference. Yet, my cousin Wang Yan is the sole exception. She is an expert at chess, and so was he. They often played against each other until dusk. Hearing that my cousin favored crabapples, he planted several West China crabapple trees in his courtyard. Everyone in the imperial city said they were such a perfect match that it would be strange if they didn't marry. At the imperial banquet that day, news of their arranged marriage spread. My cousin stood up excitedly and pulled me aside to chat. Halfway through our conversation, she suddenly noticed that one of her ruby crabapple earrings was missing. It was a past gift from Jiang Xu, and she had worn them specifically for the banquet today. Just then, she was called away by the Marchioness of Yongchang for a chat.
Yan, please, you must help me find it.
As I found the earring in a corner of the imperial garden, I heard the sound of splashing water. He, who was terrified of water, was already unable to struggle. It was a matter of life and death, so I pulled him out without any hesitation, only to be caught red-handed by the crowd that came looking for us. With wet clothes clinging to our skin, our innocence was impossible to prove. My cousin's eyes welled with tears in front of everyone, and the gossip spread through the imperial city like wildfire. Bound by the rigid rules of propriety, I ended up marrying into the Jiang family in my cousin's stead. Within a few days, my cousin also agreed to marry into another family out of spite. When I went to see her off on her wedding day, she held my wrist, her tears falling like rain.
Sister, if you wanted this marriage so badly, I would have gladly let you have it. Why did you have to risk the heir's life to gamble for it?
Somehow, these words reached Jiang Shu's ears. He became absolutely convinced that I had set the whole thing up. On our wedding night, he lifted my red bridal veil, pinched my chin, and stared at me for a long time. Suddenly, he let out a cold sneer.
"This face of yours is indeed the perfect disguise."
Before I could even make a sound, his kisses, filled with deep resentment, came raining down on me overwhelmingly.
"Now that my little sister-in-law has gotten her wish and married her brother-in-law, how does it feel?"
From then on, he treated me even worse. In front of others, he was cold to the extreme. extreme, unwilling to utter even half a word to me, leaving me to be ridiculed by everyone. They said I used a favor to force a marriage, reducing myself to holding a title in name only. At first, my mother-in-law pitied me and took my side in everything. But seeing how cold and icy things remained between us, she suggested we consummate the marriage, only to be flatly rejected by him. Gradually, my mother-in-law's attitude cooled as well, blaming me in her words for failing to capture my husband's heart. Yet when night fell, he would come to my room every single night. Sometimes I was exhausted to death, but he would still hold me tight and force me to serve him. When I resisted him, he would grab my wrist and say,
"Why are you running? You racked your brains to marry into this manner. Can't you even bear this little bit of hardship now?"
There was indeed one time when I couldn't bear it any longer and bit down hard on his shoulder. He felt the pain but didn't get angry. Instead, he let out a deep, heavy sigh and murmured.
Jen.
That murmur was incredibly soft as a sigh in a dream. But once day broke, he became that cold and aloof heir to the estate once again. I didn't understand. Clearly, I was the one who had forced his hand. Yet in the end, I was left with a heart full of inexplicable guilt, leaving only an unresolved mystery with no beginning or end, and a sense of mistreatment where right and wrong were hard to distinguish. In my past life, I threw myself into it and ruined my entire life. In this life, someone else couldn't hold back and made the decision for me. The gossip was getting uglier and uglier, and my eldest aunt's face grew darker and darker because of it. If these rumors were allowed to spread, my cousin's marriage prospects would be completely ruined.
Shut up. What does this have to do with the second young lady of our house? You wicked servant. How dare you slander the young lady's innocence out of thin air? What are your intentions?
The maid kowtowed repeatedly like a pestle grinding medicine.
This servant dares not lie. She must have fallen to the bottom of the lake. Please send divers to search for her, madam.
The Marchioness of Yangcheng looked solemn. She waved her arm, and several guards stepped forward upon receiving the order. Panic seized my heart, and I swam as far away as possible, along with the undercurrent. The commotion behind me grew fainter and fainter. Suddenly, a hoarse voice drifted from far across the lake.
No need to search.
It was Jiang Xu. He had regained consciousness. Jiang Xu was hidden by the rocks, his face as pale as snow.
I slipped and fell into the lake myself, and climbed back ashore on my own.
The lakeside fell silent for a moment. The Marchioness of Yangcheng bent down to ask him,
What happened?
He shook his head, unable to make another sound. I climbed up the side of the rockery, using it for support. I was soaked to the skin, wringing the wetness from the hem of my dress. My mind raced as I thought quickly about how to bypass the guards and escape the palace. Suddenly, a dark red hem of a skirt appeared before me. I looked up. It was actually the eldest princess. Without asking any questions, she took off her own cloak and draped it over my shoulders.
Come with me.
She led me through the red walls and into a warm hall where a brazier was burning. The maid pulled the screen closed. Warm water and clean clothes were all prepared. The winter garments were thick, and after a quick wipe, my hair was already half dry. I no longer looked like I had just crawled out from the bottom of the lake. The eldest princess led me back to the banquet.
On the way, we happened to run into the second young mistress of the Wang family. This girl and I got along famously, and we lost track of time chatting.
Everyone laughed at this, and the Marchioness of Yangcheng chimed in with a smile. My eldest aunt's gaze lingered on my hair for a moment.
To win her highness's favor is indeed Jen's good fortune.
Thus, the gossip fell apart on its own. My maid, Langqi, stepped forward with an anxious look on her face. I shook my head slightly and only instructed her in a low voice, Go and find out who was wearing grayish-blue clothes today. Langqi took her orders and ran off. The Marchioness of Yangcheng had settled Jiang Xu in a side room. Holding the earring, I walked over. My cousin was standing at the door, her expression not looking very good. She took the earring and stuffed it into her sleeve without even looking at it.
Why did you just get here? The heir just fell into the lake. Fortunately, some people passing by pulled him out.
I have already heard about it. Is the heir seriously ill? He is fine. My cousin pursed her lips. Her gaze swept across my face, as if she were sizing up an object. A servant brought over some ginger water.
Come inside with me to deliver this.
With those words, she grabbed me tightly, intending to pull me inside. I shifted my stance to free myself. Sister, I won't go in.
And why is that?
The heir was just badly shaken. You share a deep affection with him. You and the heir love each other. Right now is the perfect moment for romance, and for you to show him your care and concern. An outsider like me staying there would only get in the way. I kept my eyes lowered, speaking in a sweet, obedient tone. My cousin's cheeks flushed red, and she gave my cheek a playful pinch.
What do you mean, outsider? You and your silver tongue. Though the heir and I are close, we have never had anything to hide. If you stand by our side, how could that possibly matter?
Hearing her say this, an indescribable bitterness welled up in my heart. Back then, she used to speak to me just like this. My parents passed passed away early, so I was raised by my grandfather in Qingzhou from a young age. After my grandfather passed away, my eldest uncle finally brought me back to the capital. When I first entered the Wang household, I didn't even know how the noble ladies of the capital performed their curtsies. My cousin never looked down on me for being clumsy. Whenever she went out to banquets, she would always drag me along.
Quick, try this. I had the servants make this especially for you.
And knowing my preference for magnolias,
I know this is your favorite. I saved it especially for you.
everyone said that the eldest daughter of the Wang family treated her younger cousin with absolutely nothing left to be desired. Hearing these compliments, my cousin became even kinder to me. She picked out many pieces of jewelry that she usually left idle and gave them to me.
Wear these, Jen. That way others will know you are my sister.
I was truly grateful to her, and I also sincerely believed she and the prince were a perfect match. But Jiang Xu and I didn't have much interaction. Sometimes my cousin would ask me to keep them company in the chess room. I would just stay quietly to the side and pour water for them. He played his chess, and I refilled the tea without interfering with each other. Even during the New Year feasts, the Lantern Festival, and the Flower Festival, amidst the bustling crowds, his gaze would occasionally fall upon my shoulder for no reason. With just a brief glance, he would immediately look away.
Second lady was raised in Qingzhou. I imagine many men must have proposed to you.
Of course. Our Jen is so wonderful.
But in my past life, when she escorted me to my wedding, the words she said while holding my wrist were not meant for me. They were meant for the entire imperial city. She had to make sure everyone in the city understood that she was the wronged party. Those words preserved her dignity, ruined my reputation, and shattered the last shred of goodwill between Jiang Xu and me. I don't hate her. I only feel heartache. Our past sisterly affection ultimately failed to survive a single storm. Forget it. In this life, I will just stay far away. The maid's groundless accusation in the courtyard just now, although suppressed, is still unsettling. It would be best for you to avoid him, sister. It is enough for the prince to be looked after by you, sister. I took half a step back, my tone resolute. My cousin was about to pull me again, when a crisp, laughing voice suddenly drifted from behind us.
Why are you two ladies standing in the draft?
Prince Jiang is certainly no fierce beast, yet he has made everyone afraid to go in.
I looked toward the sound. The visitor wore a black martial robe with an embroidered waistband, and a short blade hung at his side. He had handsome features. My cousin's gaze flickered away. She didn't respond to him. She turned slightly to introduce me.
This is Huo Ting, my cousin on my mother's side, young General Huo. This is my second sister, Wang Zhen.
His gaze lingered on my cousin's face for a moment before looking at me. He smiled and cupped his hands in greeting. I lowered my eyes and returned the gesture, my gaze sweeping past his sleeves and the tips of his shoes. As the door was pushed open, my cousin naturally pulled me inside with her. It was too late for me to refuse. A brazier was burning in the room, making it warm and cozy. Jiang Xu was wrapped in a heavy cloak, his lips still somewhat pale. The moment my cousin stepped in, she headed straight toward him.
You still don't look very well, heir. I was so worried just now. It is all my fault for being so far away and not running over sooner.
Jiang Xu looked at her for a moment, his tone instinctively softening.
It is fine. No need to feel guilty.
His gaze crossed my cousin's shoulder and glanced over in my direction, only to look away a moment later. My cousin sat down next to Jiang Xu and suddenly let out a sigh.
Those rumors just now were truly absurd. Why target anyone else when they had to drag Jen into it?
My hand holding the teacup tightened slightly.
Jen grew up in Qingzhou and is an excellent swimmer. If she had been there, you wouldn't have had to swallow that lake water, heir.
Jiang Xu slowly turned his gaze toward me.
That is indeed a pity, but in some matters, the timing of offering help requires careful calculation. A moment sooner is genuine kindness, but a moment later becomes calculation. Since you are such a great swimmer, Lady Wang, I suppose you must understand best what it means to arrive at the perfect moment.
What a thing to say, heir. How could there be any calculation in saving a life?
Jiang Xu curled his lips, but the smile didn't reach his eyes.
There is. But a Yan is so pure and kind. How could she understand the malice of human nature?
I kept my head down, digging my fingernails into my palms. So he has been reborn too. This sarcastic, barbed tone of his. I know it all too well. In our past life, whenever he was convinced I was playing mind games, he would look and speak just like this. I had tried thousands of times to explain my difficulties to him, but he had already made up his mind, believing I had deliberately stolen the marriage and used my favor to force his hand. In our past life, my cousin married the third prince. The entire entire imperial city said her hardships had turned to blessings. Though her younger sister had snatched her betrothed, she had ended up marrying into the royal family instead. But the dark schemes within the royal palace, how could outsiders ever see them? The third prince had a violent temper, striking out with his fists at the slightest displeasure. My cousin endured it during her first pregnancy, but later, she truly couldn't take it anymore. In the middle of the night, she fled to the Marquis of Yangshan's estate, weeping bitterly. When she rolled up her sleeves, her wrists were covered in bruises. I stood there, my tears falling uncontrollably. Jiang Xu personally poured tea for my cousin, comforting her with gentle words. He escorted her home that very night, and the next day he openly submitted a petition to accuse the prince, willing to completely fall out with the third prince's faction. When he returned home, the look he gave me was exceptionally cold.
Your sister is living in hell, while you enjoy a sweet life in the Jiang family. Wang Zhen, do you not feel any guilt?
That night, I brought up the divorce papers. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at me for a long time. After a long silence, he held up the paper that would sever our ties, and let the flames consume its edges, the ashes falling into the iron brazier. He turned his face to me, his gaze cold, yet his palms were warm. Clasping my waist, he pulled me up from the wooden chair, and in 2 steps pressed me down onto the edge of the brocade quilt.
You've made things so miserable for a Yan and me, and now you want to run away.
That night, his eyes were bloodshot, so fierce it felt as though he wanted to tear me apart and devour me. I did not understand him. He clearly resented me, yet he refused to divorce me. There were clearly tens of thousands of ways to end this emotional debt, yet he chose the one that would wear us both down the most.
Jen.
My cousin waved her silk handkerchief in front of my face.
What are you dazing off for? My cousin is speaking to you.
I quickly pulled my thoughts back. Huo Ting looked at me with a smile, pulling a sachet from his sleeve and handing it over.
Meeting the second miss for the first time. I didn't bring any proper gift.
This is a bone flute brought back from the northern border some time ago.
It sounds like a bird when blown. If you don't mind, miss, please accept it for your amusement.
I accepted the bone flute and thanked him softly. My cousin grumbled.
You gave me a clay figurine, but you gave Jen such a rare treasure.
Huo Ting looked at her tenderly.
And who was it that scrambled to take the clay figurine?
Jiang Xu held his teacup, his eyes fixed on the surface of the tea, without looking up. Seeing Jiang Xu left out on the side, my cousin quickly brought the topic back.
The heir has always been afraid of water. Why did you go by the pond just now?
Jiang Xu set down his teacup, his tone casual.
I saw that the purple flower on the decorative rock was blooming beautifully and wanted to pluck one to give to a Yan.
During our 3 years of marriage in my past life, I only learned from the old housekeeper's mouth that he had been pushed into a pond by his stepbrother when he was a child and almost drowned. From then on, he never dared to step within half an inch of water. This was the first time in 10 years that he had walked to the water's edge just to pluck a blooming purple magnolia to give to my cousin. My cousin's cheeks flushed red.
I only like crabapples. Why did you pluck that magnolia? All right. Now it has truly become a Yan's fault.
Jiang Xu smiled slightly, but that smile suddenly froze on his lips, and a fleeting look of helplessness crossed his eyes. After returning to my room, I lay face down on the bed, burying my face in the quilt, not moving for a long time. Langqi brought in a bowl of ginger water, and reported in a low voice,
Aside from the old maids brought by the various families, no one else was wearing a gray-blue outer robe today.
With my eyes closed, I gave a soft murmur of assent. In the carriage on the way home earlier, my cousin had been leaning against the window, lost in thought. My eldest aunt called out to her, and when she turned her face, she could not hide her dejection. After all, the Marquis of Yangshan's estate did not ask for an imperial marriage today. My eldest aunt patted the back of my cousin's hand.
Don't worry. What happened today was just an accident. What is meant to be yours will not slip away.
My eldest aunt suddenly looked at me, smiling with unusual warmth.
Zhen, having met young Commander Huo today, what did you think of him?
My heart skipped a beat. Though she asked casually, I understood the underlying meaning. Having lived under my eldest aunt's roof for so many years, I knew that whenever she smiled and probed like this, she was making a decision on my behalf. Outsiders believed the eldest princess's words, but she did not. She only suspected that today's incident of falling into the lake was orchestrated by me. Hearing this, my cousin adopted a much warmer tone.
Cousin Huo has a bold and straightforward temperament, and we know his background well. It would be a good match.
I lowered my eyes. I am willing to give it a try, aunt. From then on, my aunt would constantly invite Huo Ting to visit our estate. He never came empty-handed. One day it would be hot roasted chestnuts. The next day, a package of tea leaves. And the day after, a medical text.
I heard the second miss has been studying pharmacopoeias lately, so I found this copy of Essential Prescriptions of the Golden Chamber.
My cousin would help me take the gifts, never failing to tease us a little.
Cousin, You drop by more often than our own guards now.
Huo Ting would just grin, and I would curl my lips into a slight smile. Seeing us like this, my cousin's expression softened quite a bit, as if a great weight had been lifted from her mind. And so, early spring arrived. The cold ice melted, and the willow branches sprouted tender green leaves. Before the festive atmosphere of the new year had fully faded from the city, invitations from various households began to flutter in like falling snow. Even the eldest princess set up a martial arts arena for a grand gathering. With red banners fluttering, the entire city was astir. On this day, Huo Ting brought a kite.
The sparrowhawks of the northern frontier love to fly high. Would you like to try?
I don't know how to fly one, so he helped me hold the string.
Follow the wind. Keep your elbow steady and give it a gentle tug.
The kite soared to the sky.
Second miss. Look.
I shielded my brow with my hand, putting on a happy expression. The wind pulled the kite string taut. The two of us held the same line, separated by 2 paces. Neither of us stepped forward, and neither of us stepped back. My cousin leaned against the windowsill, watching the kite drift up and down. Her joy was tinged with a hint of ease, but gradually, her smile faded, and she stared blankly at the crabapple flower buds in the courtyard. I understood her melancholy. Now that the new year had passed, the estates in the imperial city, arranging betrothals, stretched on, one after another.
Ah, Jen, do you think the heir apparent can still come to propose?
Once, while I was reading a medical book, she looked at me, a trace of panic in her eyes.
Could he have had a change of heart?
He couldn't. I turned a page. The heir apparent's feelings for you, sister, are sincere. My cousin let out a sigh of relief and returned to the window to look at her crabapples. By the day the letter from the Marquis of Yongshang's estate arrived, my cousin had grown somewhat weary of waiting. Tearing it open to look, she saw it was an invitation to a flower viewing party. Her entire being instantly came alive. The pretext was false. This was actually to select a consort for the heir apparent. Holding the envelope, her brow finally smoothed out. Blankly then slipped another invitation over. I was startled.
Ah, Jen, you have an invitation too.
My cousin's smile faded slightly. I casually placed the invitation on the corner of the table, my tone remaining unchanged. If the 2 ladies of the Wang family invited only you, sister, wouldn't that be far too obvious? Perhaps they feared you would be in a difficult position, so they asked me to go along as a shield. Hearing this, my cousin seemed to find it reasonable. She covered her mouth and laughed softly, but as her gaze swept over my invitation, she suddenly paused. She placed the 2 invitations side by side on the table, and her smile vanished bit by bit. This handwriting. I leaned over to look. The characters for Wang Zhen on the invitation were written in a neat, orderly hand. It was actually Jiang Xu's handwriting. I had organized his study for 3 years, so I knew that handwriting better than anyone. And my cousin's letter. It was written in the standard official script of the old scribes in the residence. My heart panicked, and before she could finish speaking, perhaps it was written by a scribe in the residence. It is just a coincidence that it looks like the heir's handwriting. I hurriedly took the letter of advice back from her hand and slipped it under my medical books. Besides, the eldest princess is hosting an event at the archery range tomorrow. I promised long ago to go and watch the grand event, so I won't be attending the flower viewing party. You can go ahead without any worries, sister. My cousin stared at me, the smile still hanging on her lips, though it seemed to have been faded by the wind.
All right then.
The next morning, my cousin and I boarded our carriages in front of the residence. She headed east, while I headed west. I deliberately instructed the driver right in front of her. The road to the western archery range is long. Do not dawdle. The carriage sped down the street. I leaned against the carriage window and closed my eyes. This way, she will surely feel at ease. Left the city walls. The road gradually became rugged. The horse suddenly let out a tragic shriek, and the carriage lurched forward violently. My entire body slammed against the carriage door. The driver pulled desperately on the horses. As the carriage scraped past an old locust tree by the roadside, branches crashed down noisily onto the roof of the carriage. A more intense sound of hooves chased us from behind. A traveler grabbed the reins of the wild horse, bringing the carriage to a firm halt. The driver was drenched in sweat.
Miss, it looks like someone tampered with the wheel's linchpin.
I lifted the carriage curtain, staring at the crack. In the end, she still doesn't trust me. Huo Ting sat firmly atop his black horse, holding the rope of another brown filly behind him.
You must have been frightened, second miss.
With anger pent up in my chest, I did not even want to force a smile. Did Lieutenant Huo follow my carriage out of the city, or was he already waiting on this street? He was taken aback for a moment, and then he smiled. This smile was different from before. It lacked that hint of obsequiousness, looking instead as if someone had just exposed a delightful secret of his. His brow relaxed completely.
It turns out Yan was wrong.
I said nothing, only raising my head to look at him.
She said the second young mistress of the Wang family has a gentle temperament and smiles whenever she meets a guest.
He wrapped the reins around his wrist once.
Only today have I seen the truth. The carriage almost crashed into a tree trunk. Yet, Your very first reaction was not fear, but to interrogate your savior.
Lieutenant Huo has not answered my question yet. He tilted his head slightly.
You smile at me, my lady, but the lock on your heart is tighter than the city gates. During this past period, I sent you medicine and books, and accompanied you with a smiling face to fly kites in the courtyard. Did you think I did all that because I had nothing better to do? Rather than pressing my warm face against your cold wall in the manner, I figured I might as well take a gamble today.
I curled my lips in a mocking smile. Lieutenant Huo certainly went to great lengths.
Without going to such lengths, how could I pull off this hero saves the beauty act today?
These words were spoken so bluntly that they actually didn't feel annoying. Unlike before, those roasted chestnuts and kites are much more pleasing to the eye. Lieutenant Huo is certainly being direct and straightforward now. He smiled, released the reins of the little brown mare, and handed them to me.
Are we going? If we delay any longer, the other guests will have shot all the targets at the archery range.
I nimbly mounted the horse. His hand, which had reached out to assist me, was left hanging in midair, a flash of surprise crossing his eyes. The wind from the west of the city blew over, carrying the scent of green grass, which smelled much better than the crabapple blossoms in the manor. At the archery range, the colorful flags fluttered in the wind. The eldest princess sat on the high platform, bowing her head to blow on her tea. Huo Ting and I took our places on opposite sides of the field and began our match. He shot an arrow, and I followed with one of my own. He hit the target time after time, and I matched him shot for shot without a single miss. The crowd slowly gathered around us. Some guests clapped and praised our skill, while others kept score for us.
This is getting boring.
Huo Ting suddenly lowered his bow, his gaze locking onto the end of my hair.
How about that magnolia hairpin on your head, second lady? Why don't we use it as a wager? I will stand right here, and if I can shoot it off with one arrow, I win.
Everyone gasped in shock. That hairpin was tucked right against the side of my head. If his aim was off by even a hair's breadth. He looked at me with a grin, raising an eyebrow slightly.
Second lady, are you willing to take this bet?
The old maidservant accompanying the princess on the high platform paled in shock. Just as she was about to step forward, the eldest princess raised her arm to stop her. She looked at me, a hint of amusement appearing in her eyes. I bowed toward the high platform, then turned back and stood firmly facing Huo Ting. After you, General. Huo Ting had already drawn his bowstring. The longbow was pulled taut, the arrowhead pointing directly at me. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and incredibly heavy. The arrow flew through the wind, whistling past my ear. With a sharp crack, the hairpin fell to the ground, shattered in two. My full head of dark hair, losing its binding, instantly cascaded down and whipped about in the wind. The archery range fell into a sudden, dead silence. Opposite me, Huo Ting stared at me in a daze.
You truly have remarkable courage, second lady.
His voice was much deeper than before. I simply trusted in your archery skills, General. I brushed my hair back behind my head, but the general has destroyed my hairpiece. How do you intend to compensate me? He finally recovered his composure, reaching into his pocket. Just as he was about to pull out the silver hairpin he had bought earlier, I seized the opportunity, drawing my bow and knocking an arrow in a swift, sideways motion. The arrow flew close to his body, and the string of his jade pendant snapped at the sound of the wind. With a clink, it fell to the ground. Since that is the case, then I shall take the general's precious jade as compensation. I put down my bow, and finally let out a hearty, joyful laugh. The young masters and ladies watching the spectacle erupted into cheers. From the high platform, the eldest princess clapped and laughed heartily. The old woman refilled her tea, shaking her head repeatedly.
The second Wang daughter truly possesses divine archery skills, and she has such a beautiful face. Not to mention young General Hua, even this old woman is completely mesmerized. Look at him. He has completely forgotten to put down the bow in his hand. Clearly, that arrow pierced straight into his heart.
Huo Ting wrapped the broken hairpin carefully in a silk handkerchief and placed it gently inside his robe.
I ruined Jen's silver hairpin just now.
He looked uncharacteristically uneasy.
This is to make it up to you.
He handed me an exquisitely carved magnolia silver hairpin. I accepted it with a smile. Just as I was about to express my thanks, a voice suddenly drifted from behind me, cold as frost.
It seems we have arrived at an inopportune moment and missed a wonderful show.
I turned my head and saw Jiang Xu and my cousin sitting closely together inside the carriage, lifting the curtain to look over. I did not know how long they had been watching. Sister, weren't you attending the flower viewing banquet today? Why did you come here? My cousin stepped down from the carriage with a smile and walked toward me, her tone carrying a hint of bashfulness.
The banquet was too crowded and the heir found it tedious, so he brought me out for a stroll.
She looked at me, and then at Huo Ting. A hint of smugness rose in her eyes.
What happened just now? We saw it from afar. Ah, Jen, you were truly fortunate today. Your hair is completely disheveled.
I leaned to the side to dodge her. I tied my loose hair into a knot myself and fastened it with that new hair accessory. Her fingertips hovered hovered in midair, and her smile froze for a moment. Two gazes fell upon me at the same time. One was Huo Ting's, carrying a hint of amusement. The other was Jiang Xu's. He was stepping out of the carriage, his leg kicking over a wooden stool. The wooden stool tumbled twice and crashed beneath the carriage shaft with a heavy thud.
Second Miss now has a guest to back her up, so she doesn't even care about her own sister anymore.
Huo Ting furrowed his brows.
Show some respect, your lordship.
Jiang Xu didn't even spare him a glance, staring dead at me instead, yet speaking to my cousin.
Yan, you said that day Second Miss was highly skilled in swimming and expressed regret that she couldn't save me. Looking at it now, not only is her swimming superb, but this trick of bewitching others
is an even more outstanding talent. The eldest princess slammed her cup down, the bottom of the cup crashing onto the table.
Ah, Xu, why are you acting this way toward a young lady?
Jiang Xu lowered his gaze and bowed.
Aunt.
The Hao family is hosting a banquet today. Why did you slip out of the manor? If you came, so be it. Yet you direct such cold sarcasm at Second Miss Wang. What? Do you think my archery range is too quiet? So you came to stir up trouble? You have always been upright in the city. What is wrong with you today?
Jiang Xu's face turned pale, and he only said softly,
My words were wild. Your reprimand is correct, Aunt.
The grand princess ignored him further and looked at me with a slightly gentler gaze.
Second young lady Wang's archery is superb, and with such poise today, it makes me see how the young can be easily bullied.
She then instructed Huo Ting.
Young General Huo, you must escort second young lady Wang back home.
Huo Ting cupped his hands in salute. Jiang Xu suddenly took half a step forward, blocking the space between him and me.
She will take my carriage.
Huo Ting paused in his tracks. My cousin remained where she was. No need. I did not look at him. I will ride back with young General Huo. His tone was slightly more urgent than usual.
Does the young lady not care about her reputation? Or does she not care about the Wang family? To let outsiders gossip like this.
What does my reputation have to do with you, heir apparent? He looked at me in astonishment. In our past life, he had seen me weep. He had seen me suffer. And he had seen me grit my teeth in silence beneath him. He had never seen me retort so sharply regarding any scandal of the Wang family. I met his gaze, speaking clearly and deliberately. You have not yet become my brother-in-law, heir apparent. Are you already so eager to lecture your sister-in-law? A faint redness appeared at the corners of his eyes, like a drop of red ink bleeding into pale paper.
Of course.
He let out a bitter laugh.
It has nothing to do with me.
Yet after speaking, he did not move away, remaining frozen on the spot. Seeing that his expression was worse than usual, the eldest princess let out a sigh.
Just take the carriage.
She detained Jiang Xu, intending to question him privately. It was extremely quiet inside the carriage. My cousin sat to one side. She lowered her hands, twisting her silk handkerchief. I stared out the window at the trees flying past.
Ah, Jen, your hand.
I lowered my head. There was a long, narrow scratch on the back of my hand. It was just scratched by a tree branch when the carriage broke down. She reached out to touch it. I hid my hand inside my sleeve. Her fingertips hovered in mid-air.
Sister, do you resent me?
The carriage wheels creaked and groaned. I remained silent for a long moment. When I spoke, my throat felt dry. Sister, have you ever considered that if the wheel had been any thinner, I wouldn't even be alive to sit here and have this heart-to-heart with you? Her face grew paler by the second.
I was short-sighted.
She let out a soft laugh, but there was no joy in it.
I was afraid you had feelings for him. I was afraid your trip to the archery range was just a cover, and that your real destination was the flower viewing banquet. So I tampered with your carriage wheel, and ordered Huo Ting to follow you. If you turned back, he would stop you. If you didn't turn back, he would happen to rescue you. She turned her head to look out the window. Do you understand, Ah Jen? At the flower viewing banquet, the begonias were in full bloom. They bloomed so beautifully that every guest stopped to admire them. But he didn't look at the flowers, nor did he look at me.
The carriage continued to move forward. The hustle and bustle of the market slowly drifted in through the curtains.
Then he suddenly left the noisy banquet, saying he wanted to take me for a walk. I was so happy all the way. But when we reached the archery range, he saw you standing in the wind with your hair down, and his eyes were fixed on you. At that moment, I finally realized why he took me out of the estate. It was never because he wanted to spend time with me. He just needed an excuse to find you. So, Ah Jen.
She turned her head to stare at me, her eyes filled with a weary realization.
It is not that you are longing for him. It is he who is obsessed with you.
That is impossible. My mind was in a complete jumble, and I denied it, instinctively. She turned her head to look out the window, and did not speak for a long time, tears falling drop by drop, soaking into the silk fabric on her lap. Night gradually fell, and the roadside lamps were lit one by one. Faintly, the sound of horse hooves caught up with us. My cousin's gaze was fixed on a spot outside the window. Suddenly, she wiped away her her tears.
Ah, Jen, I have never begged you for anything. Today, I ask only one thing of you. No matter what, do not have any more entanglements with the heir.
Outside the carriage curtain, the horse's steps drew closer.
Ah, Jen, do not blame me.
Before I could reply, she threw her body outward on purpose.
Sister, don't push me.
The accident happened too quickly. My heart skipped a violent beat. Jiang Xu, who had caught up, instinctively leaped off his horse and firmly caught my falling cousin in his arms. The two of them tangled together, and her lips brushed against his face. The commoners surged forward. Merchants craned their necks to watch, and the coachman's face turned deathly pale. I bent down and stepped out of the carriage, staring at them. My cousin lay in his arms, trembling uncontrollably. He held her, his gaze as cold as winter snow.
She is your sister. Can you really not tolerate her to this extent?
Wang Yan's cry just now had been drowned out by the noise of the street, but Jiang Xu, who was right in front of her, had heard it clearly. I looked at him, finding it utterly absurd, and did not want to utter a single word of defense, but the whispers of the onlookers were already crashing in from all directions.
Did you see that just now? The heir himself held the eldest Wang daughter tight. The two of them crashed right into each other.
Not only did they hug, but her lips were pressed right against the heir's cheek.
In broad daylight, under everyone's eyes. This is intimate skin-to-skin contact.
It was said in the palace earlier that the heir wanted to marry the eldest Wang daughter. Now that they've done this in public, this marriage is probably set in stone.
If they don't marry, where will the eldest Wang daughter's reputation go? Hasn't the heir always been noble and pure? Surely he wouldn't dare deny it, right?
Those words came one after another, every single sentence helping them settle the score.
If you hug, you must marry.
If you kiss, you must wed.
There was no way out when it came to innocence, just like in my past life, except this time, the one trapped in the center of the crowd was not me. Jiang Shu's sharp gaze swept over, and the onlookers immediately shut their mouths, shrinking back with their heads tucked in, shrinking back and retreating quickly. The crowd dispersed rapidly, leaving only a few merchants watching from afar on the main street. I looked at them with a cold gaze and said mockingly, my sister's fall was truly impeccable timing, and the heir's heroic rescue was even more opportune. Congratulations to the heir and my sister on getting exactly what you wished for. I turned to leave, but someone hurriedly rushed up from behind and tightly grabbed my wrist. It was Jiang Xu. He had cast my cousin aside and stood behind me with bloodshot eyes, his breathing hurried and burning hot.
Jen. It shouldn't be like this.
His grip was incredibly tight, like a drowning man, clutching onto his last piece of rotting wood.
Just now, my aunt already made things clear for me. The one I actually love is...
I pushed his hand away with a slap. Caught off guard, he was flung off by me, the redness in his eyes burning even hotter. He had always been cold and self-disciplined, but now he was so panicked he couldn't even speak coherently.
Jen, listen to me. Just now, I caught up with everyone, because I wanted to tell you. The one I have actually loved from the very beginning is...
Your lordship. I cut him off. My voice was not loud, but it was like a bucket of ice water poured over a spark. In full view of everyone, there was intimate physical contact. Did you not hear clearly what those people just said? He froze in place, as if heavily struck by something. All his passionate words got stuck in his throat. He stared at me, the redness at the corners of his eyes fading inch by inch into a deathly pale flesh tone. In our past life, this was exactly how you forced me into marriage. I met his gaze, my voice extremely faint. Forget it. Stepping into the residence. The main hall was brightly lit by firelight. My eldest uncle sat high in the hall, his face dark and grim. His knuckles tapped against the edge of the table, making sharp, thudding sounds.
Today, your sister's carriage overturned midway. The coachman said that when Yan fell from the carriage, she cried out that you pushed her. She is your elder sister. Why are you so malicious? If this reputation gets out, that the second young lady of the Wang family harmed her own sister, will you have any face left?
I met his gaze, my tone flat and calm. I did not push her. It was my cousin herself who suddenly fell toward the roadside. My cousin is so kind to me. Why would I want to harm her? Eldest uncle was taken aback, looking at eldest aunt with suspicion. Eldest aunt stroked his back to soothe him, her tone soft and gentle.
Calm your anger, master. The coachman's words are only one side of the story. Jen might not have done it on purpose. Fortunately, the one involved with the Yan today was heir apparent Jiang. Everyone else saw it clearly. He certainly will not shirk his responsibility. This can also be considered a stroke of luck, which happens to facilitate this marriage.
She turned her face to look at me, the smile in her eyes cold and chilling.
But Jen, how this household treats you. You know very well in your heart, if such a thing really happened and word got out, it wouldn't just be your life that is ruined. The entire reputation of the Wang family would be tarnished. Your uncle serves as an official in court and values reputation above all else, the moral duty of gratitude and sisterly love. Surely your aunt doesn't need to teach you again.
Provoked by her words, my uncle's anger flared up again.
Go kneel in the ancestral hall. Do not get up without my order.
My cousin burst into the room from outside. She shielded me, staring at my uncle.
What happened today has nothing to do with Jen. If you want to punish someone, punish me.
My aunt moved to my cousin's side, holding her arm tightly, her voice filled with pity.
You silly girl. You suffered a grievance out there, yet you still want to take the blame for her when you return.
She glanced sideways at me, her smile remaining unchanged.
Do you see now, Jen? Your sister would rather suffer herself than let you bear even a shred of infamy. I often hear people say that the warmest thing in this world is sisterhood. Yet the coldest thing is also sisterhood. Your sister has given you her all. You must never break her heart.
She stepped closer to me, helping me straighten the hem of my clothes, her voice perfectly calm.
Young General Huo is a rare fine man. Settling this marriage early is best for everyone. You must cherish your life.
I raised my eyes, staring at my aunt, and then looked at my cousin. My cousin turned her face away, not daring to look me in the eye. My aunt was still smiling, a smile of absolute certainty. After going through such a long, roundabout way, they were ultimately afraid that Jiang Xu and I would still have lingering ties. By foisting Huo Ting upon me, she not only showed the benevolence of an elder, but also cut off any potential trouble. Your niece understands. I lowered my eyes, speaking every word with utmost obedience. This was the response they wanted, so I simply gave it to them. Meanwhile, the Marquis of Yongchang's household was thrown into utter chaos for days. As soon as Jiang Xu returned home, he knelt in the ancestral temple.
I, Jiang Xu, would rather die than marry her.
The old marquis smashed cups and bowls, and the Marchioness of Yongchang wailed for a long time. After a few days of stalemate, reputation ultimately triumphed over all else. The marquis's household finally sent word that they would select an auspicious date to propose marriage. My aunt's heart, which had been in her throat for days, finally settled. That very day, she went to the temple to burn incense. My cousin's face also finally showed a hint of joy, while the others were in such a frenzy. My side of the house was peaceful instead. Huo Ting came over every few days, shrinking by my side, helping me grind herbs, grinding until he was covered in sweat. I told him I could do it myself, and that he didn't need to do this chore, which chafed his skin. When I wrote medical texts in the study, he would sit at the desk flipping through military formations. Sensing that I was staring at him, his ears would turn red. Once, while I was drying herbs in the backyard, he somehow managed to find a small clay stove to help me brew licorice water. He scorched it 3 times. When he brought it over on the 4th try, I took a sip. It was sweet. Rumors were spreading everywhere that Huo Ting was utterly infatuated with Wang Zhen. My aunt pressed us several times to set a date. There is no rush. It won't be too late to wait until my sister's wedding is settled. Huo Ting also said there was no rush. I placed a black silk ribbon into his palm. Last time, I broke your jade pendant, so use this instead. From then on, he wore it every single day. Even when the tassel started pilling, he still wouldn't take it off. Once, while chatting with guests at the table, someone remarked that the cord hanging from young General Hua's hip was quite unique.
Ah, Jen gave it to me.
The delight in his eyes could not be hidden. On the day the Marquis of Yongshang's household came for the fortune reading, the main hall was packed with guests, all filled with joy and excitement. Only Jiang Xu remained silent. My cousin's gaze fell upon his face, but he only stared blankly out the window. The afternoon sunlight was beautiful, and the shadows of the magnolia trees danced across the window paper, flickering bright and dark in the wind. On the path outside, Huo Ting and I were walking over, our silhouettes cast by the sunset onto the gray brick floor inside the hall, vanishing in a flash. My eldest aunt glanced over for a moment.
Yan is betrothed to the heir, and Jen's marriage to young General Huo is also close to being finalized. Both girls in our house now have someone to rely on.
The commotion in the side hall gradually faded. The river breeze blew willow catkins all over the city. Huo Ting leaned against the wooden railing, tossing fish bait into the lake, 1 pellet at a time.
Ah, Jen,
he said in a casual tone, without looking at me.
Military dispatches have arrived from the border. Next month, I might have to accompany the eldest princess to the front lines.
I tossed some bait into the lake without making a sound.
At least half a year, and at most a year or 2.
He paused for a moment.
Before I head beyond the pass, I would like to ask you for the honest truth.
The red carps in the lake scrambled for the bait, splashing scattered ripples. He looked toward me, his gaze quiet and intent. I did not reply to him, but merely reached out my hand to brush away the willow catkins on his neck. He tightly grabbed my wrist.
Ah, Jen.
I tilted my chin up and slowly slowly leaned in close to his lips. His breath hitched, and he closed his eyes. The fading light brushed against the stone archway. There was a visitor outside the door, who paused for a moment before turning around with a flick of his sleeve, vanishing into the far end of the willow grove. His footsteps were incredibly heavy. Huo Ting's eyelashes were still trembling, anticipating that imminent kiss. But I pressed both hands against his shoulders and gave him a hard push. Splashes of water surged up. As he fell backward into the water, the red carp scattered in a panic. He poked his head out from the bottom of the pond, his face filled with shock and daze.
Jen, why did you do this?
I crouched by the shore, resting my arms on my thighs, and tilted my head to look at him. The expression on my face right now was probably as cold as the river water. Huo Ting. My voice was extremely soft. The person who fell into the lake with me that day was you, wasn't it? His entire body shuddered. The wind swept across the water, shattering the reflection beside him. After a long silence, he lowered his gaze.
When did you figure it out?
The very first time I touched you. He looked up. I stared at his embarrassed face. That day in the side room, you wore a black robe. You clasped your hands and bowed to me. A hint of grayish blue showing from your sleeve, and half a stray leaf clung to the toe of your shoe, and half a fallen leaf clung to the tip of your shoe. That bamboo forest is right by the lake. The corners of his mouth twitched, his smile filled with bitterness.
You are truly clever, Jen.
Let me guess. I stood up straight and looked down at him from above. The one you actually admire is my sister, but her mind is entirely filled with Jiang Xu. Only I was nearby. You accompanied me into the water, hoping to have me and him face each other in our wet clothes. With things done this way, he and I would be bound together. And you could take advantage of the situation. He did not try to defend himself, but you didn't expect that when you ran to her to confess your feelings, she would reject you. In her heart, there was only Jiang Xu, and fearing that you would be sad, she tried to match you with me. She thought this was the best of both worlds. It would ease her guilt toward you and secure a good future for me. But before you could seize the opportunity, I slapped that maid's face and slipped away myself. You lost your excuse. Yet you didn't want to reject sister's kindness, so you went along with it and approached me to put her mind at ease. Young Master Huo, your love for sister is truly as deep as the sea. Ripples on the water's surface expanded layer by layer. Red carps gathered in the distance, and then dispersed. He stood in the water, like a stone statue eroded by heavy rain.
Jen.
He finally spoke, his voice dry and raspy.
Everything you said is correct. Not a single thing is wrong.
He raised his eyes to stare at me. There was no denial in those eyes, nor any evasion.
At the start, it was an act.
He paused.
But later on, it was real.
I stared at him without saying a word. His tone grew slightly panicked.
Because Jen has been playing along with me from beginning to end. Was this entire time just an act?
Not entirely. Young Lieutenant Hua's archery is indeed very impressive, and that bowl of licorice water was indeed sweet. A sudden spark flashed in his eyes. Then, I spoke and snuffed out that light. It just had nothing to do with love. His Adam's apple bobbed. He raised his hand, lifting the wet black silk ribbon hanging from his waist. Water dripped from the tassels, one drop after another.
Then what about this? You made this for me with your own hands. Was that fake too?
I just picked it up at the market. It cost 2 copper coins. Did you actually take it seriously, young Master Huo? His arm froze right there, his knuckles turning white.
Then why did you do all this?
Just to use you to get myself out of some minor trouble. I turned around and left immediately. He scrambled onto the shore, his water-soaked shoes stepping onto the gray bricks. He took 2 quick steps to chase after me, then stopped.
Jen.
I did not turn my head.
Your parents are gone. Your aunt is the one who can arrange your marriage. She has already agreed to betroth you to me. You can only marry me.
I stopped in my tracks. Huo Ting, I did not turn around. You guessed wrong. I don't need an outsider to steer my life, and I will never marry you. On the day I fell into the water, I had already established a connection with the eldest princess. She had questioned me.
What you did in the lake. This palace saw all of it. Since you were determined to save him, why did you hide your own involvement?
This humble girl does not wish to trade a shred of goodwill for a marriage. She raised an eyebrow, a hint of interest flickering in her eyes.
You dislike these rules and constraints as a burden.
This humble girl simply finds them unreasonable. She laughed softly for a moment.
Your temperament actually reminds this palace of my own youth. Back then, I wanted to lead troops into battle. The entire court said women were unfit to represent the state. I only replied with one sentence. You refuse to let me go, only because you fear I will fight harder than any of you.
During this period of time, I studied medical books tirelessly and practiced drawing my bow every day. I was by no means idling about. I took the eldest princess's words at the venue to heart. Behind the scenes, she reviewed my pharmacology knowledge and tested me on my prescriptions. I answered every single one of them in detail. She never pointed things out directly, but every time she finished reviewing my prescriptions, she would just nod her head slightly. I knew she was testing me, and I also knew she was waiting for me to speak up for myself. Finally, last night, the eldest princess hosted a banquet. After the guests left, she dismissed the guards and kept me in the side room for a heart-to-heart talk. The lamplight cast her silhouette onto the screen. She looked at me for a long moment.
The frontier is harsh and grueling, nothing like the fine food and drink of the imperial city. Are you absolutely certain?
Absolutely certain. She raised her cup and took a sip, then suddenly changed the subject.
That day at the archery range, the way Ah Shu and young General Hua looked at you. This palace saw right through it. Those two are the finest young noblemen in the imperial city, yet you didn't pay either of them any mind.
I lowered my gaze, staring at the shadow cast by the lamplight on the stone floor, and smiled slightly. Your Highness, what does romance even matter? She clapped her hands and laughed.
Wonderful.
Then she stared at me, her eyes filled with genuine admiration.
This palace's camp happens to lack a skilled physician. Since you have this drive, then come with me to the northern frontier.
She paused for a moment, then added,
This palace will grant you one more thing. Your marriage will be entirely in your own hands from now on. Whomever you do not wish to marry, and whenever you choose to marry, is entirely up to you. No one in the city shall have the right to force you.
I prostrated myself and kowtowed deeply. She reached out her arm and pulled me up. Her palm was burning hot and full of strength. As I stood up, the lamplight swayed gently, stretching the shadows on the drapes extremely long, just like the purple magnolia in the master's courtyard back in Qingzhou, casting its shadow upon the bricks. From my past life to this one, I have finally made up my own mind. I am by no means anyone's wife, nor am I anyone's sibling. I should simply be myself. As I stepped into the courtyard, the dark night was so thick, it wouldn't disperse. Inside the room, the cold, eerie moonlight was blocked by the window, leaving only a dim, gloomy glow. Before my fingertips could light the lamp, an arm suddenly pulled me tightly into a chest in the darkness. The wooden door was locked shut behind me, the latch letting out a sharp click. Lips carrying the chill of the wind came crashing down overwhelmingly, both violent and wild. It was Jiang Xu.
Zhen, don't be with Huo Ting.
I turned my head to avoid him, pushing him away with my arms, but he wouldn't budge at all. Jiang Xu, you are mad. He didn't make a sound, burying his head as he tried to press down on me again. I raised my hand and slapped him across the face. It was a crisp, loud slap, sounding exceptionally clear in the dark night. My palm went numb and sore. His face was slapped to one side, but he grit his teeth, turned his hand to grip my chin tightly, and pressed his lips down on mine once more. He grabbed my wildly flailing arms in a tight grip, pressing them firmly against his chest. The thumping of his pulse vibrated against my fingertips, like a wild beast thrashing against its cage. This kiss was even more fierce than the last.
Zhen. I truly adore you. Don't marry Huo Ting. Don't marry any outsider. I beg of you.
My tears welled up and spilled over completely off guard. As the water streamed down and brushed against his face, he stopped abruptly. The bedroom fell dead silent. Only his heavy breathing could be heard, along with my uncontrollable, sorrowful sobbing. He slowly released his tight grip on my arms, his fingertips trembling with fear as he wiped away my tears.
Zhen, don't cry.
Why? Why won't you just let me go? The moonlight shone through the window onto his face, which was now filled with confusion and grief, but I could no longer tell what was real. Jiang Xu, in our past life you constantly claimed you did right by my sister. My tears flowed uncontrollably, but in this life she waited for you for so long, only to end up with a husband who dared to break into her sister's bedroom on their betrothal day. I hid from you for so long, only to end up with a brother-in-law who claims to love me without ever asking for my true feelings. I stared at him. Jiang Xu, to you, the two of us sisters have never deserved a shred of respect. His lips twitched, but he did not make a sound. Jiang Xu, you have always been like this. When you resented me, you helped me correct my mistakes. And when you loved me, you helped me understand love. When on earth will you ever consider whether I actually want it? Through my tear-blurred vision, his face overlapped with his face from our past life. In our past life, you resented me for years. In this life, you still cling to me and won't let go. What on earth did I do wrong? What on earth do I owe you? From beginning to end, I only did one thing, and that was saving you. Tell me, is helping someone also a sin? If I had known that this act of kindness would take 2 lifetimes to pay back, Jiang Xu, I would rather you had drowned in that pond. He looked as if he had been slapped a second time. His entire body froze right there. After a long time, he squeezed out a word.
I'm sorry.
He turned and left, his steps uneven, each step as if walking on the edge of a blade. The next day, Jiang Xu went to visit my cousin. They faced each other in the greenhouse, the cup of water turning from boiling hot to ice cold. No one knew what they talked about. That night, my cousin became bedridden. Her high fever persisted for several days without subsiding. The maid mentioned that at night, she babbled incoherently, calling out a Zhen over and over again. When I went to see her, her face had grown noticeably thinner. She stared at me blankly, her eyes swollen from crying. She pressed my arm under her palm.
Jen.
Her voice trembled.
Did you suffer terribly in your past life?
I looked at her, unable to make a sound for a long time. The misery of my past life had been buried in my heart for too long. So long that I myself did not even know if anyone would feel heartache for me.
Jen.
Her voice was so dry it was almost inaudible.
I had a dream. I dreamed of how you looked after marrying into the Marquise's household. Draped in the red gown of the heir's wife, you stood under the eaves waiting for someone for a very, very long time. That person never came, yet you never gave up. You just stood there, like a flower planted in the wrong soil. Blooming in that spot, slowly withering away.
Her tears flowed into her mouth, her eyes filled with tragic pain.
I mistook obsession for true love, and jealousy for pride. Yet for a man who didn't care about me, I ruined my own life beyond recognition. And ruined the life of the sister I should have cherished most.
She whispered, as if talking to herself.
I'm not getting married.
Absurd.
My eldest aunt, upon hearing this, immediately cut her off.
The birth charts have already been matched, and the auspicious date has been set. The entire imperial capital knows that the Marquis of Yangshang's estate wishes to ally with the Wang family. Now you say you won't marry. Where is the Wang family to put its reputation? How do we account for this to the Marquis of Yangshang's estate? This marriage is by no means child's play.
If mother wishes to accept the Jiang family's alliance, then marry into them yourself. I am not marrying.
My eldest aunt was startled by her sharp retort. She turned her head to look at me, believing that I was the one who instigated this, secretly disrupting my cousin's marriage. But she did not understand that from the moment I submitted the imperial physician's register, the victories, losses, marriages, and reputation within these deep courtyards had long ceased to have anything to do with me. A few days later, Jiang Xu returned to the Wang residence, having requested an imperial decree of grace. He stood in the main hall, facing my eldest uncle and aunt, and spoke clearly and thoroughly, word by word.
My own character is lacking, and I am unworthy of being a husband. The eldest daughter of the Wang family is of outstanding grace. It is I who am not worthy of her.
The imperial decree made it perfectly clear. My cousin was adopted as a foster daughter by the Marquis of Yangchang's family, and Jiang Xu took her as his foster sister. In the future, he would stand up for her in the capacity of an elder brother, never allowing anyone to speak ill of her.
All blame lies with me, and has nothing to do with the eldest Miss Wang.
My eldest aunt shut the door tightly, extremely furious. But although she was resentful, she was completely helpless. With the imperial decree of grace hanging over them, who would dare to utter a single word of dissent? The heir of the Jiang family had paid a personal visit, lowering his posture to the absolute minimum, and speaking in the gentlest of terms, giving the Wang family both substance and face. What else could she possibly say? My cousin, on the other hand, felt a sense of relief. That night, she drank a whole bowl of soup and asked the kitchen for an extra plate of mung bean cakes. When I went to see her, she only gently stroked my hair and said,
Father said we have relatives in Qingzhou and suggested I go there to clear my head. I told him I would. When I pass by the white magnolia tree in your grandfather's courtyard, I will water it for you.
When the household learned that the eldest princess had granted me the appointment to accompany the royal physician, my aunt remained silent for a long while. Suddenly, she let out a sigh.
Jen, I used to suspect that you did everything for your own gain. Only now do I realize that my own mind was too full of schemes, and I was projecting my own calculations onto you.
My uncle stood dazed for a long time, then suddenly stood up and took down a wooden box from his display shelf. Inside was a smooth, well-worn jade ring.
When your father lay dying, he begged me to look after you.
His eyes were filled with shame.
I did not look after you well. Over these years, you never lacked food or clothing in this house, but in other ways, we have wronged you these past years. If you face hardships out there in the future, remember, you still have family in this house.
He held the jade pendant out to me, turning his face away. I accepted the precious jade and simply bowed in response. The night before my departure, a fine drizzle began to fall. According to the patrolling soldiers, Huo Ting and Jiang Xu had a massive fight on the training grounds. It was a bare-knuckle brawl, and they ended up covered in mud from rolling in the puddles. No one saw how it started. They only knew the two men were talking at first, and then fists started flying. Huo Ting took a blow, splitting his lip, and used the momentum to slam Jiang Xu into a muddy muddy pit. Jiang Xu got back up, wiped the muddy water from his face, and threw another punch. Someone went to report this to the eldest princess. Wrapped in her cloak, the eldest princess heard the report and said,
Let them fight. They'll quiet down once they're done.
Neither of them made a sound, save for the dull thuds of iron fists hitting flesh and their heavy breathing. By the end of the fight, all their strength was spent. Gasping for breath, they lay side by side in the mud, letting the torrential rain beat down on their faces. Early the next morning, when Huo Ting arrived on horseback outside the Wang residence, the fresh bruises were still visible on his mouth. Seeing me appear, he took a step forward, his Adam's apple bob.
Tripping you into the pond back then was the decision I regret most in my life. If I could live my life over again, I would stand by the lake in an honorable manner, waiting for you to pass by and make your acquaintance openly and honestly. The road to the border is long. I don't expect you to promise me anything. I only ask one thing of you. If one day you are willing to look back at me, let me know.
The black ribbon hanging from his waist fluttered in the wind. Huo Ting, this ribbon really was just chosen at random. It is not expensive.
Then you can give me an expensive one.
When the army set out, my cousin squeezed through the crowd of onlookers and stuffed a round bundle into my arms. Rabbit fur leggings, medicine for the cold, tall leather boots, and several pairs of cotton socks. With her head lowered, her fingers moved frantically to tie the cords of the bundle securely. She tied them, untied them, and feeling it still wasn't secure enough, wrapped them around once more. Sister, my cousin looked up, her eyes rimmed with red, but she smiled and gave me a push.
Go quickly. Don't keep the eldest princess waiting. Once you reach the northern border, remember to write.
She reached out to tighten the sash of my robe.
Take good care of yourself.
The army departed from the imperial city. Yellow sand filled the air along the main road. From behind came the sound of bird calls, calm and unhurried, separated by half a street. I did not turn around, even though I knew exactly who it was. Huo Ting rode his horse, keeping his distance behind me. He heard it too, but only glanced at me for a brief moment, without uttering a single word. Guarding the supply carriages, he followed far behind at the very rear of the army. Only later did I learn that the heir of the Marquis of Yongshang had volunteered to escort the supplies and accompany the army on the northern campaign. The entire court was shocked. Escorting supplies was a grueling task, exposed to the wind and rain, with constant threats from bandits along the way. Never before had a noble young master been willing to take on such a chore. Lan Kui saw him and told me he has lost a great deal of weight and his jawline is much sharper than before. Before the army set out, he dug up all the midget crabapples in the Jiang residence and replanted the entire courtyard with purple magnolias. I pulled on the reins and urged my horse forward, speeding up slightly. The wind filled my sleeves. In my past life, I was locked away in a secluded courtyard, staring at the square patch of sky above, thinking that was all there was to life. He kept me locked away for a lifetime. In this life, I refuse to let him lock me away again. In this life, I sit upon a horse. Before me lies a long road, and behind me stand high mountains. As for those who watch and wait from behind, let them keep waiting. I still have a very long road to travel.